Hi, it's Amy with the Hag Reads, and I am here with, I'm going to try for two today. So the first book I have to talk about is Mirror Image, which I did talk about in one of my library hauls. It's the Evil Mirror book by Michael Scott and Melanie Ruth Rose. So, Evil Mirror. This is the main character goes to London for, it's a yearly buying trip. He sells antiques in a shop in Los Angeles, and so this is his yearly European buying, and he hasn't been having good luck, but he goes to this one auction, and he finds kind of in the back corner this old, ugly, speckled, just gigantic, 7-foot tall by 3-foot wide mirror in a plain, kind of ugly stand that it is not from the same period, apparently. And he buys it. And he has it shipped back to his home in Los Angeles to a workshop where he has an employee that works there. And then he's got a shop at a separate location where the items are sold. But he has like a guy that he's been working with for a long time who does all the restoration. But you get the sense throughout the movie that the mirror itself is ugly, like it's speckled and spotted and warped. But because it's an old mirror, it's one of the ones that have the silver backing. It's an antique mirror, and it's very big for, given the antiquity of it. And he thinks he can get it cleaned up and sell it for, a pretty tidy profit. And almost immediately after he gets it back, mayhem ensues. The guy that's cleaning the mirror, he's attempting to take the back off. He's having to drill and he is literally flattened by the mirror and dies. And so this sort of activates the mirror, and now it's evil, and it's trying to bring something evil from the mirror into our reality. So you're kind of getting two stories here. You're getting the story of the guy buying the mirror and all of the mayhem that ensues, where it kind of takes over his life, and it's affecting the community around it, and these gruesome deaths and stuff like that. But you're also getting interwoven in that the history of the mirror as an occult object, whose original owner was, Dr. John Dee, and he was an astrologer to one of the English queens. And so you kind of get this, and there's also, a mysterious female character and her monk friend, and they all are kind of trying to perform some kind of rite or ritual to draw something out of the mirror in search of power for themselves. And so you get this whole backstory, and I'm not going to say anything more than that about it, because if you are intrigued at all by this, you should definitely read the book. The deaths, and there's graphic sexual content. The deaths are gory, and they are described in great detail. The historical stuff also described in vividly disgusting detail. What I initially thought when I heard the premise of the book, and then as I started to read it, I kind of got a feeling what it reminded me most of was the movie that I saw on Netflix, and I think it's still available on there, Oculus, which was an evil mirror movie where the mirror kind of took over their lives. I really, really enjoyed the premise. The idea, I think, is, not evil mirror as an original idea, but the whole conception of its kind of supernatural historical setting with alchemy and magic and that sort of thing is pretty original, and I thought that the bones of the story were very good, but the execution, I kind of had some trouble with that. I really didn't. Well, I don't know that you're meant to like any of the characters, but I didn't really like any of the characters. I didn't feel particularly sorry for them. I felt most sorry, obviously, for the couple of people who were killed by the mirror, really did not bring it on themselves. It just was opportune. The mirror obviously didn't want the guy taking the back off, because all he ever did was make the screw, fix the screw heads, which were stripped, so he couldn't even begin to loosen them to take the frame off the mirror to try and clean the mirror appropriately. The mirror clearly did not want that to happen, and so he was the first casualty. And I think he's probably the character that I felt the most sympathy for, because he really didn't do anything, and he clearly wasn't a bad person. But throughout the book, I think you get drawn out that the mirror was bringing out the very worst in people. So people who started out kind of normal, who were maybe a little bit arrogant or, self-centered in real life, that you could probably deal with and at least understand them, became entirely different people. And so his daughter and his wife are in here, and his wife has been cheating on him for years. And so you get all of this kind of, and then the mirror's just drawing all of this energy into itself. And at some point in the book, I think you reach the feeling that there's no, with these people, there's just no stopping what's happening, because it's making them their own worst selves. That's how I felt about it. It had a twist ending, which these kind of things sort of do. But by the time we got there, I thought I saw it coming. I kind of got it. If I hadn't been paying if I had read it really fast, I probably would not have picked on it. And I probably would have been surprised by the ending. I can totally imagine this book as a movie. It could be easily made into a screenplay. And I think it would do very well. But for a book, I didn't hate it, and I didn't absolutely love it. I gave it 3 stars on Goodreads, and I might go as high as 3.5, because the idea is pretty good, and it is fleshed out, no pun intended, very well. And it draws from Greek mythology, and it draws from, the occult spiritualist movement in England, and then it draws on, modern things. So it brings a lot of elements together, and it's well written for what it is, and it's no plotting problems really. It's hard when you don't like any of the characters. Like, I wasn't vested in the outcome, thinking, oh, I hope he makes it through, or oh, I hope he realizes what he's doing and he turns it around at the end. I just kind of went through it. I didn't wish anyone was dead, but I didn't feel particularly interested in the survival of any of the characters. So, but if you like this, what I'm describing, if you liked maybe Oculus, the movie on Netflix, or you like, this is again a kind of atmospheric evil entity with some historical background, period stuff, and then modern. But it is, I will say, extremely gory. There's graphic sexual content. This is definitely for adult readers. But I think that people who are who really love horror as a genre, this would be right up your alley, because it definitely ticks all of the boxes on what you like about horror. Because I didn't like any of the characters, and because it was so graphic, and I felt disgusted most of the time I was reading. So if that was the author's goal, was to make you feel kind of total success there, because I felt disgusted by most of what happened in this book. Like, this is not a book you should eat a sandwich or have a bowl of soup, or this is not an eating and snacking kind of book, in my opinion. Unless gory, gross things don't bother you. I have some issues. I'm a little squeamish about certain types of things. So this ticks some of my icky buttons. And then, so that's all I have to say about that. But I would recommend it. If you love horror and you like the kind of, like, evil entity trying to enter the world through, whatever means. In this case, it's a mirror, and it's very well done. I would highly recommend this for you. It's I don't have access to how many pages, but it wasn't a very long read. It just took me, I think I read it in 3 sittings over 3 different days, simply because I didn't want to rush through it. It's not that kind of cheesy 80s horror where you could read it in one sitting and you're like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, but you know you're reading a horrible book. This for me required a little more thought, and I because the plot involved, you know, you're trying to figure out this backstory and how that ended, and how, you know, and how that could be interpreted with the new story arc. So it did take me 3, maybe 4, but I read it over several days, and I really thought about it for a while first. So not a love, not a 5 stars, but for people who love horror, yes, this book is for you. My other book that I want to talk about is I reread Carmilla, because it's been a very, very long time since I read Carmilla. And I have some notes here that I was typing up to put on my blog, which I haven't done yet. So this is by Sheridan, Fanu, and it was published in 1872. I know a lot of people think that Bram Stoker's Dracula was really the first vampire novel, and then other people think this Carmilla is the first. But the first one that I'm aware of is a book called Varney the Vampire, which I read while I was attending the University of South Carolina in Columbia, when I lived there between, I guess, ages 17 and 23. But I very first attended college in Columbia, South Carolina. And I read it at the university library because at that time, this book, as far as I know, was not available for public consumption through any of the major booksellers. And at that time, there were not book websites like there are now, where there's Amazon or Borders or anything like that. Since then, Varney the Vampire has become available. It's been republished. I saw a trade paperback soft cover, which I fully intend on owning. Now, it is not a fantastic book. Let me make this clear. It was originally published as a serial, which were in a magazine. These were meant for public consumption for the lower classes. These, and I'm sure other people read them, but it was kind of foo-fooed by the upper class. That's not their kind of thing. It's not intellectual. It's lowbrow, is kind of how a serial would have likely been perceived, especially one like this. But Varney the Vampire, let me see if I wrote in here, was published in 1845. So it's got a 30-ish year jump on Carmilla, and then I'm actually not sure how many years between Carmilla and Dracula. Hold on one second. I can find that out because I own like 86 copies of Dracula. Alright, so Varney the Vampire, which is the first one that I know of, published in 1845. Carmilla published in 1872, and Bram Stoker's Dracula originally published in 1897. So 30 years between Varney and Carmilla, and then 72, almost 30 years between, it's like 25 years between Carmilla and Dracula. Now, Carmilla is extremely short. It's only 108 pages. If you've never read it, you're not really going to lose. And I read a digital copy from my library. And so you're talking about let me see if I can do this. So if yeah, it's probably more like, so maybe this size of a page. And then in here, so that it was, you know, there were wide margins. Maybe if you took off a ½ inch on this side, and big top and bottom borders, that for the version I read, had, you know, so 108 pages is probably really 25 pages if it was all, as is the case here. You know, like if it were written like this, it might have been 25 pages. Not a long read at all. What's interesting is that, you know, Varney was more of a Nosferatu character. Uh, not living in society, kind of creeping around, sneaking into young girls' bedrooms. So it had kind of a sexual undertone, but the vampire itself was not attractive, healthful, you know, it, it, not attempting to be a part of human society, really. In Carmilla, you have a vampire who is attempting to be a part of society. There's a ruse used to get, so this is a 12-year-old girl is the image that you get, who's appearing in various places, and people around will die, and it just looks like they have stopped living. They lose their energy very quickly. It's said throughout that often they die within 2 or 3 days of, whatever is happening. And then there's this, so she gets herself installed with these people at this castle, and they have and the family has a 12-year-old daughter. It's a husband, a father and a daughter, and the Carmilla kind of attaches herself to the daughter, and there are lesbian undertones for this, even though they're 12-year-old girls. The way they talk about love is not particularly sexualized, but the feelings are definitely of not a platonic friendship love. This is a kind of consuming ownership kind of love, is what I felt like. But the author Fanu probably got away with this at the time because he claimed that vampires are the undead with no inherent sexuality. So, surprisingly got away with this somewhat erotic, although it's 12-year-old girls, subtext in this vampire novel. And I think a lot of modern readers, like, I'm reading it and I'm like, it's clearly vampire, vampire, vampire. But at the time this was written, and even Varney, vampires were not it's part of pop culture. Now, we all know about vampires. You see I'll use the zombie movie as a thing, and people are always like, nobody wants to say the Z word. It takes people forever to figure out that it's a zombie, and you can't just shoot it in the body. Well, if we were to have an outbreak of that sort now, people would certainly probably be like, that's a zombie, let's shoot it in the head. And you hope that the mythos that's grown up around zombies is correct. And so we were talking zombies, not like, what's the book? Where it's like the voodoo type of zombie, where this is a ritual preparation with herbs and stuff, where you've got like, oh God, I can't think of the name of the book. I've lost my mind. The Serpent and the Rainbow. So that type of not eating flesh zombies. So as opposed to a voodoo type zombie. So I think a lot of modern readers are like, this is stupid. It's clear it's a vampire. Why are these people so slow to like grasp the concept, and they're just letting it happen? And I think readers now, because we understand, you recognize the thing immediately. Readers at the time these were published would not have been familiar with, what we see now as clearly the set of things that make a vampire: pale skin, sharp teeth, no reflections in the mirror, that sort of thing. But the difference where Varney was portrayed as this Nosferatu kind of character, not living in society, a predator, kind of on the outskirts, not physically attractive, not trying to insinuate itself into society, is just kind of sneaking through and taking his victims. Carmilla is trying to insinuate herself in society in short bursts, but is also not a picture of ill health. Whereas the victims are kind of wasting away, Carmilla, aside from having kind of an exhaustion about her. It is not an active character in terms of, you're not going to find this 12-year-old girl running through the, through the hallways and behaving as, as an excited young girl. Is always kind of tired and stuff, but is the picture of health, a healthful skin color, that sort of thing, does not look unhealthy in any way. So you get that kind of difference of the way that they're portrayed. So it would be harder to possibly accept that a 12-year-old healthy, normal looking girl who behaves relatively normally is sucking the life out of people, literally, and than you would in as Varney is portrayed as an ugly Nosferatu, clearly an evil character, driving a stake through the heart of, or cutting off the head of, whatever is necessary to, and in Carmilla, the death involves the typical cutting of the head, stuffing of the garlic, and then burning the corpse after to ashes, and then putting it in a river. So pretty much, whether or not they're a vampire, there's assured nobody's coming back from that. But it took them such a long time to reach that point, and there was kind of a hysteria about it. And I think that with modern readers, they're not taking themselves back to the time of, a vampire as a thematic element was not common. So it wouldn't been part of the popular culture. And so you can see why it was much more slow and drawn out and very sedate. It's almost boring, but I find it fascinating because here you're talking about a character written in a time when everybody didn't go, oh, that's a vampire. So I'm so over that. And where vampires are now largely muscled, handsome, tall characters with huge male parts searching for their perfect mate, who is always a small petite woman and who is a virgin, and the sex is always great the first time. Vampires are very different now, and they sparkle apparently in some literature, so what we conceive of a vampire now would not likely have entered into the public the collective unconscious of the public in terms of an easily recognizable trope. So I saw on Goodreads that it didn't get very good reviews from quite a few people, simply because they're like, it was boring, it was obvious it was a vampire, these people are stupid, not giving the context to the time in which it was written, the kind of lives these people led, what they thought about sex and sexuality, and what they thought about women and young girls, and that sort of thing. So from my perspective, everybody should read this, and you should try and place yourself in a culturally appropriate mind frame, because you're going to get more out of it that way. Certainly Varney, more salacious, creepy vampire sneaking into girls' bedrooms and ravishing them at night, drinking their blood. Clear, this is a much more evil character in terms of motivations and everything. From the outset, nobody's going to think a 12-year-old girl is the seat of all evil and is trying to, ultimately her love for the daughter would lead to death. And I didn't feel like there was any indication that, like, part of the book talked about how vampires came to be and how there came to be more of them, and that was kind of interesting. But then I thought, if that's the case, why aren't there more, and why weren't they more prevalent for the mythos they gave for the origins? But because in Carmilla, I didn't get the sense that it was 3 bites and a blood sharing, that basically anybody who was bitten and died would come back as a vampire. And I find that interesting, because then wouldn't you just be overpopulated, one, and it would keep going and going and going. And I can't imagine that any if you want to entertain the idea that a vampire is a real thing, that there are vampires out there in the world and we are not aware of them, that it would be a successful venture staying under, secretive society that's preying on human beings if everybody they bit turned into a vampire. You would have an epidemic, So if you want to entertain it as a real concept, there has to be some other mechanism for the creation of a vampire that doesn't result in everybody who's bitten becoming a vampire, because very quickly you would realize what was happening, and humans might lose, but they would certainly retaliate. It wouldn't just perpetuate. This one of the problems I have with Salem's Lot is just pretty much everybody becomes a vampire. Well, how are they being contained in this one small town, though? And why aren't they eventually creeping much farther afoot? You're talking about a long time period between when the main character encountered the vampires and when he goes back after he finds out that they have basically been there the whole time. Well, why aren't they moving from this small village if everybody, because that was kind of the premise of the book, is that almost everybody who became was bitten and died became a vampire. Well, why are they only contained to this one village? And that's never made clear, and that's one of the detractions of Salem's Lot, which I actually really love that book. That's one of my favorite by King, and there are many of his that I don't like at all, is what's the check for that? You would have to have a relatively minor society, or I don't know if they would even be in a society, because they're like Varney and both Carmilla are portrayed as largely solitary creatures. Obviously, she has an entourage. She got there, and things were arranged where she would be left behind to prey upon these people. And so you have to wonder, if you're going to entertain the idea that as a vampire, as a real thing, what would be the checks on such a population that they could remain secret, thrive and be healthy for whatever their nature is, and how would perpetuating the species, so to say, work in a way that doesn't result in mass swaths of humanity turning into vampires simply because everybody who's bitten then is infected and becomes. It's the same problem I have with werewolves. If everybody that's bitten becomes, if they don't finish them off then why isn't there an epidemic? Why wouldn't it be quickly known? And then you hit into ideas where, like, the Hollows with, I can't remember the name of the author, but the Rachel Morgan series, where witches have come out. So there are witches and there are werewolves and there are these different sects of society, and there is animosity between humans who live a typical human lifespan and then witches who have powers and they live their average lifespan is 150 years. So you get an animosity and a jealousy over humans towards all supernatural creatures who have varying lifespans and different abilities. So now you've got sections of society and you're talking about discrimination again, and all of those types of concepts where you would have to find a way for regular people and special people to really live in a society together where they weren't terribly segregated. Because, of course, people who don't have magic powers or who can't turn into werewolves, there's going to be a selection of those who, one, fear the power that brings. It's a longer lifespan. You have special abilities, not necessarily able to tell them from regular people. So there would be a power struggle then, wouldn't there, of people wanting to make sure that humans could retain power over, or at least equal to, and most people want power over, they want to be more powerful than beings they might perceive as able to dominate them. So I think that creates an interesting problem intellectually that relates to things we have now with racism, sexism, classism. You just get it on a different scale in terms of that you're not talking about necessarily your own species. So that's my thoughts about that. And I have already gone a half an hour, so I'm not going to talk about my blanket today. I will just have a blanket. I will have a video about my blanket, and it will just be a yarn vlog. Yay! So that's my thoughts on both Mirror Mirror. If you're a horror fan, go. Carmilla, give it a chance. Put yourself in the headspace for the time frame that we're talking about, for what was part of the collective unconscious or the public, the readily available knowledge that people would bring to a story like that at the time, and attitudes about women and girls, and about the customs and habits of people who encountered strangers. There was, I think, more of a sense of hospitality, especially among a higher class of people, where if somebody just showed up and they needed a place to live, well, they took this girl in it, and under the assumption that nothing bad was going to happen to this girl or to them in undertaking, basically custody of her. So I think that that's the problem that readers have, where it gets negative reviews where people are like, ugh, it was stupid and boring, and how could these people not know that was a vampire? So I had a great time discussing this with you, and I'd love to hear if you read Carmilla, if you liked it. Have you read Varney? I know that people are discovering it now, and I hadn't looked for years and years like I did, probably around the 5 or so years around the time that I read it at the university. And nobody really knew anything about it, and there was like zero interest. I could not talk to anybody really, and I'd have to reread it now because it has been more than 20 years since I read it. But I enjoyed it for what it was. It was an interesting look at the development of vampire in popular literature. If you know of anything before Varney, I would certainly be interested in knowing about it. If you have thoughts similar or different to mine about Carmilla, I would love to hear them. And I haven't reread Dracula in a long time, so clearly I need to, because I don't have anything profound I can say in relation to Varney and Carmilla and Dracula, other than Dracula became the prototype of what we think of as a vampire almost exclusively. So interesting in that respect. So if you have anything you want to share with me about vampires, vampire culture, vampire literature, bring it on. I'd love to know. Happy whatever time of day it is for you, and I will see you next time. Bye!